Hello and welcome back to the From My Perspective podcast, where I, Jackson McCarty, tell you all the names you need to know in the college football landscape that could change the football landscape in the very near future. So if you are a longtime viewer of this channel, or if you are a short time and you've just seen the last episode, or you've tuned in and out, whatever, you know that my predictions have not quite been on fire. But this week, I'm going to make sure it changes. We've got the full 10 yet again, 10 games to look at, 10 predictions, including who I think crushes who, has to be aligned within 10, and we'll talk about it all right after this. But if you will, hit subscribe for me, helps me out a ton. I'm just trying to grow the channel, and we deserve more college football content. We deserve more people digesting college football content. If you could hit that subscribe button, we get a little bit closer to that goal. So I would say probably the biggest game, one of the biggest games this week, is going to be Ohio State versus Penn State. Now, both teams have been very impressive to this point in the year. Penn State has hit a rather sizable road bump in their game against Michigan. I think that we could be in for more of the same in terms of what Penn State's defense looks like, because I do think at the end of the day, Ohio State has a better offense, and they've also proven that they don't really care what their score is. They're going to leave their starters in, meaning things could get ugly. We're fresh off of a bad game and bad showing from Iowa against Ohio State. They've followed up with another good defense, and granted, it is in Happy Valley, but when you look at the rosters just side by side, you notice a marked difference in how good the Buckeyes are and how much talent they have, and it's hard to beat a team like that, even whenever you have the home field, even whenever you've had a good year to this point, and a lot of things look like they're going well. I do think Ohio State comes in there and really leaves the mark on Happy Valley. Their offense is better than Michigan's, and what we saw in that Penn State game was ugly. The running game in specific really torched Penn State. Now, I think this will be more of a pass-oriented game. I think Stroud really needs this one for his resume, because it does appear that he is chasing the Heisman and putting a lot of work towards building up his Heisman resume, if you're catching what I'm saying. I don't think he's going to come out of this game, but it should be lopsided regardless. Whether or not the starters stay in, you would assume that this one is going to be very heavily in favor of Ohio State. I don't want to spend just a ton of time on that one because I don't feel like there's a lot of thought that goes into that. But, I also kind of think it's a lopsided game between those two. Somebody I don't quite see being as lopsided and is definitely in a weird position compared to where we started our year. Syracuse versus Notre Dame. Now think back on it. If I would have told you that one of these two teams, at the very beginning of the season, if I would have told you one of these two teams lost their first three straight and got some heat back in the middle of the season, but we're still kind of towing that 500 line, I don't think you would have guessed it was Notre Dame. If I would have told you one of these teams was going to be undefeated all the way until they played Clemson, I don't think you'd think it was Syracuse. Both of these two teams have almost kind of taken the other's expectations and flip-flopped it, which makes this kind of interesting because both teams, while Syracuse did recently stumble, they're still proving that they're a good team. It took a very close game against Clemson to beat them. Clemson is supposed to be one of those top teams in the country, so you can't be disappointed in that effort. And then when you look at Notre Dame, they're 3-1 in their last four. They're finally starting to pick up some configuration and finally understanding how this roster is going to work together. I think this should be a fun one, but I do think the Orange come out here and take the win. Notre Dame, and I give them a lot of credit based on who they've beat, because BYU and North Carolina are not slouches by any means. BYU has underperformed based on what I think their talent level is and based on where I personally projected them and thought them to be at the end of the season. But, you take who you play, and Notre Dame beat them. So you got to give them credit there. And then obviously North Carolina's a ranked team. Drake May has looked phenomenal. He could be a dark horse Heisman contender. There's a lot of things going right for them, but the Fighting Irish still got it done. So 3-1 in their last four, but we all know what Syracuse has been doing. They finally got caught. So how do you regain some momentum against a team that, again, has found a little bit of success here recently, and they're starting to string things together? Well, you leave it in the hands of Sean Tucker. Notre Dame is 61st in rush yards allowed per game. Syracuse picks up rush yards as the 45th team in the nation as far as success rate goes in doing that. Syracuse also, if you just want to focus purely on the trenches side here, Syracuse has the 39th defense in rush yards allowed. They're just inside that top 40 of fewest rush yards allowed. Notre Dame 47th in most rush yards. So Syracuse has the edge here very slightly, but still the edge in both of these categories. So you want to watch the trenches in this game because that is where it's going to be won or lost. And I know we've heard that trope, that saying, that whatever, but in a game like this, it really could imply, because Notre Dame's pass defense is very good. I would not anticipate Garrett Schrader doing just a ton, but Sean Tucker, man, he could go out here and have a very good game like we've been seeing him do. Okay, so that's a part of the ACC, and we will make another trip back to the ACC later on, trust me. But in the meantime, let's make a trip to the Big 12. Let's make a trip to two teams who have really stood out from the pack this year in what is a very crowded field. I've really liked Kansas State this year, and I've been on Oklahoma State since the start of the season. I think they're just a phenomenal team. These two get to go up against each other. It is happening in Manhattan, Kansas, but I think Oklahoma State has the juice. They have the talent, they have the coaching, they have everything you need to get it done. Mike Gundy's teams, they show a lot of resiliency and poise, each year. And once they get that big loss, they come back. They don't let it haunt them too much. That said, we don't really know that Chris Kleiman has that. We have never seen him fly this high. So we don't know what the Wildcats will look like in the crunch time with Chris Kleiman. We don't know what they look like with Adrian Martinez, who, by the way, may not be playing in this game. He's a reported game time decision right now. He's got a severely bruised knee, so even if he does play, that's a very crucial injury to remember because it takes away some of his mobility. I don't imagine that he'll be nearly as mobile or have that same level of escapability that he normally has if he's banged up coming into the game, especially on his lower half. I think that spells trouble for them, so that's definitely something interesting to watch. But regardless if he plays, Oklahoma State has more momentum, they have a better roster, they have a better coach. I would argue even if Martinez is playing, they have a better quarterback, which, I find myself getting a little bit too caught into quarterbacks, but at the end of the day, that is the most important position. That's not to devalue everything else that happens on the football field. That's just how important it is that the guy passing the ball knows what he's doing. Spencer Sanders has shown that he knows exactly what he is doing this year. With a healthy Adrian and some home field and, you're really rolling into this game, maybe my prediction changes. Maybe I am leaning Kansas State. I leaned Kansas State last week against TCU. I took that gamble. It didn't pay off for me, but I took that gamble. Maybe I predict a little bit different. I just don't know that Bill Snyder Family Stadium is enough on its own. You know what I mean? Like, if you're injured as a team and you don't have that momentum, your fan base might be rocking. They might be just tearing things apart, but you got to have everything else around it to really make it work. So the next place I want to go, we don't make very many trips to on this podcast, and that's quite the shame because I find myself falling in love with this conference every year. It's one of my favorite conferences because I am a big Group of Five guy, and the AAC right now plays like a Power Five, and especially when you look at the cream of the crop out there, you've got Cincinnati and you've got UCF going up against one another this week rather, and I kind of want to look at it like this. Cincinnati has done a phenomenal job of bouncing back from losing just about everybody. I've said that a couple times on this podcast. Anytime they get brought up, I feel like I almost have to give them kudos for that because that is such a hard thing to do. That said, UCF wins this one. UCF wins this game against Cincinnati and pushes Cincy down to 2 losses, and UCF potentially becomes the best team in the Group of Five. I personally think they have the roster currently around it to be the best Group of Five team in the country, and a lot of that is because of what they've got going on offense. And look, UCF has not gotten enough attention in media, especially on this podcast, just in general. You don't hear much about him, so I want to catch you up on what you're missing. I was a sleeper on John Reese Plumlee. I did not think that he was going to be a quality college football quarterback full time, he is proving me wrong right now. He has kept his explosivity following his transfer, and now it's in Orlando. He leads the team with pass yards, just a hair above 800, and then he's got the leader in rush yards on his team as well, 506 on the ground. You have a top 20 offense in total, including the 6th best ground attack in the country. You also got the 15th best defense in college ball, powered by their ability to stop passing touchdowns. 6th in fewest allowed in that category throughout the country. They're good. They have an established identity. They know what they're going for. You know what you're going up against. You just don't know how to stop them. Side note, I am a little displeased at the fact that Kobe Hudson isn't wide receiver 1 out there. I know that's not on Malzahn or that's not on whatever, but him transferring from Auburn, I really expected him to be like a 1,000-yard receiver this year, even with Plumlee, who I was doubting coming into the year as his quarterback. Maybe he's a hidden layer to watch out for in this game. I don't quite know. He is wide receiver 3 technically based on the stats, but he has the talent to be wide receiver 1 out there. So you got to remember that name, Kobe Hudson. On the flip side of that, though, for Cincinnati, they're not a slouch on defense. They've got the 30th best defense at present, 29th in yards allowed per game. But here's the issue. They allow 1.3 touchdowns per game just on the ground. They allow the running backs to really do some damage. They put up at least 7 every game. That's how the trend goes. But whenever you're going up against a team like UCF who loves to run it, it's going to be a lot harder to hold water there and to stop both John Reese Plumlee and the guys coming out of the backfield. It's a tough task. Cincinnati, they have the 23rd best offense, and they're 39th in pass touchdowns a game. They average 2.1. Ben Bryant has been all right. He's still not my favorite. I'm still not sold that he is the best guy moving forward for Cincy, but he came back from his stay at, I believe, Eastern Michigan, got that starting role. It is what it is. That's what they're going to roll with. That's what they're doing. I don't just love it, but I digress. The numbers are great for both teams. I'm not going to sit here and deny it. I literally started this off by saying that Cincinnati has done a phenomenal job of bouncing back. That said, UCF, they seem to be just that little bit better in every single aspect. I love this game for UCF. I love the fact that it's in formerly known as the Bounce House. FBC Mortgage Stadium or Arena or something along those lines. I love that they'll have the fans to their back. We know that that's an environment that can get pretty hectic. And plus, when you look across the sidelines, I'm not saying Gus Malzahn is a better coach than Luke Fickell, but I do know that Gus Malzahn has been to more competitive games, has been in more competitive environments than Luke Fickell has at head coach. That's just a natural tenure thing, and I think Malzahn's composure potentially in this game could be something that really helps them out here. So I want to make a trip now back to the SEC. We're remaining in the South, just in a different part of it. And I want to talk about who has been maybe my favorite team to watch in college football this year. And I think that you're either a hater or you're not watching a whole lot of college football if you don't love watching Tennessee play this season. They have been on fire, but they get a real nice game of potential, not really a trap game because we know Kentucky's good, but they get to play Kentucky this week. I think they go in there and handle business, simple as that. Tennessee's starters got what was the equivalent of a rest week. I believe they played UT Martin last week. Hendon didn't make it to the second half. I don't even remember if he made it to the second quarter. I'm going to be honest with you, didn't watch that game. Sorry if you want to get mad at me. I'm not watching Tennessee versus UT Martin, especially when the score was as lopsided as it was going into half. But that means you have to take your next step. You've had a week of being able to sit back, and it was kind of a look-over spot. I don't really think you had to worry about UT Martin that much, especially with how high Tennessee is flying this year. But now you've got Kentucky, and that defense has done well. You have to remember that they haven't allowed over 30 points this year in a single game. They have done very well to plug that, but Tennessee at least 2 tiers above every single offense they've played. That includes Mississippi State, South Carolina, Ole Miss, and Florida. Florida, depending on which one you get, they're either one of the worst offenses in the SEC or one of the best. It's a bi-weekly thing, kind of like LSU. I don't remember, off the top of my head how great or not great they were in that game, but I digress. That's still, a Mike Leach offense. That's a Lane Kiffin offense. That's the Florida team that has shown a lot of explosion. And then Shane Beamer, hey, he's got himself ranked, hasn't he? That's something you have to remember. While I do think Kentucky is a good team, while I think they'll bounce back just fine from this loss, I do think it gets lopsided. I do think it's a Tennessee win by a pretty comfortable margin. And I don't remember what the line is, but I think it's like set at 11, 12 maybe. Don't quote me on that. But I think it was just out of my crush range, or else this would have been in that. Rest assured. So we remain in the SEC this time. We've been hopping around, so let's find a little bit of a comfortable hole in the Southeastern Conference right now. And it's actually about a team that we just talked about in very short passing there. We're talking about Ole Miss, a team that had played Kentucky. They get another good matchup this week against A&M in Kyle Field. I think they get it done. They get back over their first loss of the year, and A&M continues to crumble, it has been one of the strangest things in college football this year, let me tell you. I mean, all hell is breaking loose in College Station. And it gives Ole Miss a really nice path to winning. You just have to be the more functional team, something I think Ole Miss has been really good at doing this year. They're, they get out to these hot starts, they remain composed and poised, and they just sit down and they let the game come to them, and they kind of control what's happening, and a lot of it is through their ground game, but we'll talk about that in a second. They took their first loss last week. That's fine. It happens. It's SEC football. Unless your name is Alabama, Georgia, or maybe Tennessee, you don't come out undefeated very often, so you just got to take what you got to take there. What happened there was also an anomaly. They've won by that same measure. They got out in front, but it just so happens that LSU caught back up and got out again, and I guess Death Valley did mess with them, something I was discrediting in the last episode. But all told, this is a dream matchup for Kenshawn Judkins and potentially Zach Evans. I know we're kind of playing it weary with his injury. He was limited last week, and we didn't really see much of whatever, yada, yada. A&M isn't particularly good at stopping the run. I believe they were like 102nd in the country. And you're facing off against at least one run back, maybe two, that are very, very good at running the ball. It's kind of their specialty, if you don't already know. So, watch out for that. I don't know what the lines are set for that game. If you are a betting man, I dabble. I don't go full bore with it, but that might be one to watch if you're interested in such things. We've spent a lot of time in the southeastern corner of the country, and while some people might say that these next two teams are technically in the South, or the states that they reside in are technically in the South, I kind of go with the flow either way here. You've got Louisville, who is playing Wake Forest, and if you watched the last episode, you'll remember I gave Louisville some credit. I said they're the ultimate litmus test for the ACC. They beat the teams that are going to jump tiers above them. They beat the teams who are below them. They know what level of competition they are. They know how to play to it. They've been good at that. Wake Forest is above them. I've doubted Wake Forest for a very long time now. I need to stop doing that, and I'm going to make sure I don't do that this week. I've got Wake Forest taking Louisville and making sure to really, if it's not already, cement themselves as a top 3 team in the ACC. Now let's get a little bit of context, a little bit of background here. Louisville, they're just outside of the top 50. That means 51st in pass yards allowed. They're 58th in pass touchdowns allowed and 93rd in completion percentage. If you don't know why I'm focusing so heavily on the passing game here, well, it's because Wake Forest has this guy named Sam Hartman. And if you don't know about him, let me tell you, he's very, very good at throwing a football. He is among the best in the country. He's going to be playing on NFL Sundays at doing just that. So get excited for him. Take your time. Watch this game. I think a lot of people will overlook this game because it is what is perceived to be an easier win for Wake. I don't think it's going to be an easy win, but I do think Sam Hartman flashes a classic Sam Hartman game and gets over it here. So if you let him complete the ball, I believe they're letting up roughly 63%, something along those lines, Sam Hartman is going to destroy you. You have to make sure to mess with him. You have to get in his game plan, and you really have to cause issues, something that I don't fully know that Louisville can do, not because they don't have a good defense, but because Sam Hartman's just that good of a quarterback. Louisville also haven't presented the type of offense that tells me they could keep up with the Demon Deacons, because Wake Forest scores. They go out there, they get as many points as they feel like, and hopefully it's enough to win. You know what I'm saying? They go out there and they put up numbers. numbers, you got to keep up with them, or you got to try to stop them, and I think it might be easier to keep up with them than stop them, is all I'm going to say about that. Wake's had tougher tests to show how good they can be. They've passed quite a few of those. Another win over my self-proclaimed ACC litmus test helps boost their resume. I really do think that while it might not be the flashiest win, it might not be the coolest one, you're not going to storm the field after being Louisville, but or Wake Forest isn't. If Louisville was the team that lost to Colorado, you might storm, but whatever. You're not going to storm the field over a regular ACC game against Louisville. That's not what's going to happen. But they've done good. They've got a good resume. Scott Satterfield's starting to kind of figure it out a little bit. I don't dislike him as a head coach entirely. I think that there are some things that he needs to work on, but everybody's got those. So I do think Wake Forest gets past this. I think Louisville bumps down a little bit, but keep your eyes out for the Cardinals. They're a very good team. Don't let them surprise you. Somebody who, depending on how closely you followed Pac-12 football coming into this year, may have surprised you, may have not, is Cameron Ward, formerly of Incarnate Word. He is now the starting quarterback at Washington State, and Washington State in and of themselves have been pretty notable. They almost beat Oregon. They took them to the brink. Was that Oregon? I believe it was Oregon. I digress. They took a very highly ranked Pac-12 team, just to be safe there, to the brink, and it took a last-minute push to really make that look more separated than it was. They've proven that they've got a good offense. They're still kind of clicking out there a little bit, but they run into a team that I just can't see losing right now. It's a very hard one to imagine for me, the Utah Utes. And the Utah Utes fought so incredibly hard to remain in the Pac-12 race. They're not letting it slip now. They're not going to let Washington State take away their chance for a Pac-12 title, especially not coming off of a bye, and then the week before that having to rally for what was one of the most impressive games in college football this year outside of that Tennessee-Alabama game. That sits many stratospheres above everything else at this point for me. But as a whole, Utah, they rallied the troops, and then to follow that up, they got a bye week. They got their chance to rest. They didn't have to come into Pullman, beaten up and ragged and following up from that crazy game they had against USC. No, they had their chance to sit back and get a breather, and it could be easy for somebody to get overlooked here. But I think that how Washington State has played, I think Utah is smarter than overlooking this team, especially, again, I really like Cam Ward. Cam Rising is probably better, though. Cam Rising has been phenomenal at Utah. And, as a whole, the Utes have done really well against those unexpected teams. You look at their win over Oregon State, and you look over your win against Arizona State, outside of Florida, who, again, presented themselves as one of those offenses that if you show up on the right night, they are just dynamite. They are very, very hard to stop. Outside of that, I think that they've done really well to minimize some of that damage, and I think that extra little bit of prep helps them get over the hump. So Utah, I would say, I think that they hurt their chances a lot early in the year. I think they suffered a couple rough losses. There's another team that's you could certainly describe that way in the Oklahoma Sooners, and I think you could even say that Iowa State has a bit of that going on too. I like Iowa State. I think that they could be good. I think that they could truly make a jump up in the foreseeable future. That is, assuming Matt Campbell doesn't take that Nebraska job, which has been a pretty staunch rumor. But I think the Cyclones get it done against Oklahoma, in this upcoming game, and they get their first Big 12 win of the year, which sounds crazy to say. Neither of these teams have been the best in the world. I'll be the first to admit that. Oklahoma started off really going down this downhill slope, and while they're starting to pick themselves back up, it's still not quite the same. It doesn't quite look how it's supposed to look for the Sooners. Iowa State just kind of stalled out of the gate and really haven't found any of their momentum. But bonus for the Cyclones. They are coming off of a bye. They get home field advantage. Those are two things you love hearing when you have to go in against a team that has way more talent than you. That is not disputable. When you look at the star rankings, you look at the recruitment, Oklahoma has a significant bit more talent than Iowa State does. Additional bonus, they've not allowed over 30 once this year, and they've got some awesome end-of-game totals. They allowed 10 to Kansas State. They allowed 14 to Kansas, allowed 24 to Texas. So you'd like to think that their defense is going to be able to do a little something and cause some issues, especially if Dylan Gabriel has kind of an off day. Whenever he wasn't in that game, they lost 49-0 to Texas. So really, you see how much it is dependent on Dillon Gabriel this year. And overall, OU's offense should present a strong test, but I like Iowa's chances here. It's just one of those things that I feel like could finally be everything clicking all together. I could absolutely see this game swinging the other direction. That is the nature of these predictions. It happens all the time, but that's kind of where I am. And quickly before we go, let's go ahead and look at who I have crushing who. So just to remind you, the criteria is that the line has to be within 10 for somebody who is favorited. It has to be I have to assume that this game is going to go past 2 scores. So let's say if the line is set at 3 like it is today, it has to be 2 scores larger than that I project this to win by. So it will have to be 14 or more, or it'll have to be 17 or more from the margin of victory for this team for it to qualify for me. That said, I do have BYU crushing ECU. I need to stop with BYU. I get it. I don't love ECU, though. I do like BYU a lot. Jaron Hall is a very good quarterback. Kalani Sitake is a very good coach. I just don't get why they're not stringing it all together. They're only favored by 3 against ECU. I think they can beat them by 17. I think they could beat them by 27. And even crazier than that, it's in Provo. They are basically saying on a neutral site these 2 teams are level, because you usually get a 2.5, 3-point bonus just for being the home team here. And, I've been high on BYU all year. I've got to stick with it. Maybe it shoots me in the foot, but it's a Friday night game. It's in Provo. BYU has to bounce back after that ugly game against Liberty. That should not have happened. Give me 2 scores or more for BYU. That's how this works. I've got to have somebody crushes somebody, and maybe that's a little bit dumb. For me to come out here and say that every week I'm gonna put somebody on the line and say they're gonna crush somebody else. But I'm trying to have fun here. I'm not trying to be right all the time. Yeah? Okay, so that is episode 44 of the From My Perspective podcast. I just realized I did not change that. My bad. I'll make sure it's at 45 for the next one, but that is it for now. Thank you so much for watching. See you next time.